So when we look at the global economy, we see a fair amount of synchronization around the world. Broadly speaking, most countries are dealing with too much inflation that's now coming down, interest rates that are unusually high that are now perhaps in a position to decline, concerns about economic weakness in the context of those high interest rates, still in some cases recovering from a pandemic effect a number of years ago. And so there's probably more synchronization and more similarities than differences. And just to summarize at the grandest scale, I would say we're expecting modest to moderate growth in 2024 in our base case soft landing scenario, with the caveat that hard landing can't quite be ruled out. Looking forward to 2025, we can then talk about potentially a little bit more growth and a recovery taking hold and the risk of a downturn being diminished in a way that could amount to somewhat better growth. And so that's broadly speaking the global growth outlook over the next few years. But of course, beneath the surface are some pretty important themes that are maybe worth teasing out for a moment. And so one, for example, would be that a lot of governments are running large fiscal deficits. We're going to have to see some fiscal austerity over the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so that is likely to impose some drag on some of the less well-behaved countries. Certainly demographics aren't changing quickly, but they are a challenge. And we see fertility rates falling and longevity rising, and all those trends in and of themselves aren't unambiguously good or bad, but we can say that there is a population or demographic drag on growth for the foreseeable future, and that applies to almost every country, if to varying degrees. We see deglobalization taking hold, and so that's a bit of a drag on growth as well, as countries are realigning who they trade with, and in some cases trading a little bit less. Climate change, slow moving to be sure, but ultimately a bit of a drag on growth as well, adds a little bit to inflation. And maybe the last one of these big themes to mention, and each deserves much more time, but broadly speaking, we're tracking them, and most unfortunately skew in a negative direction, taking away from growth instead of adding to it. The one big exception is technology. We are optimists, so we think we can see somewhat faster technological change in the future, somewhat faster productivity growth. It's pretty unclear exactly how much faster and whether generative AI is a general purpose technology of the sort that can unlock years or decades of fast growth and change the world. That potential exists, but I would say it's not certain yet. But the bottom line is we do think that faster productivity growth can provide at least a partial offset to some of those other thematic challenges that exist in the coming years.